On the morning of June 23, 1915, a German submarine found what appeared to be an easy target in the North Sea. The steam trawler Taranaki looked like hundreds of other fishing boats working in the cold water east of Scotland. Its hull was small, its speed was unimpressive, and its deck appeared to contain nothing more dangerous than fishing equipment. For the commander of U-40, the situation seemed familiar. A torpedo would have been wasteful against such a minor vessel. The more economical solution was to approach on the surface, threaten the crew, and destroy the trawler with gunfire. U-40 moved closer, but Taranaki was not simply fishing. A heavy cable disappeared beneath the water behind its stern. At the other end of that cable was a British C-class submarine, C-24, travelling completely submerged. A telephone wire ran beside the towing cable. From the trawler above, British sailors quietly reported the German submarine's position, distance and course to the submarine below. U-40 was not stalking a fishing boat. The fishing boat was leading U-40 into the sights of another submarine. This strange encounter explains why German U-boat crews became deeply suspicious of Britain's fishing fleet. A trawler could be an innocent civilian vessel, an armed patrol boat, a minesweeper, a decoy ship, or the visible half of an underwater trap. By the Second World War, German commanders were warning that incorrectly lit trawlers might be attempting to lure submarines close. Measures were introduced against suspicious fishing vessels in February 1940. The warning was based on a lesson Germany had already paid for in blood. In the waters around Britain, the silhouette of a fishing boat could no longer be trusted. To understand why the trap worked, it is necessary to understand what the early U-boats actually were. The submarines of 1914 and 1915 were not vessels designed to spend an entire patrol beneath the surface. Underwater, they were slow, cramped, and restricted by batteries that gradually lost their charge. Their electric motors were useful for an attack or escape, but the boats normally traveled on the surface using diesel engines. A surfaced submarine could see farther, move faster, ventilate its interior, and recharge its batteries. The open conning tower also gave officers and lookouts a far better view than a narrow periscope. For much of a patrol, an early U-boat behaved less like a permanently submerged hunter and more like a small torpedo boat that could disappear underwater when danger approached. This mattered when German crews encountered merchant ships and fishing vessels. A U-boat did not carry an unlimited supply of torpedoes. Each weapon occupied valuable space and might be needed later against a troopship, cruiser, tanker, or large freighter. Using one to destroy a wooden fishing smack made little military sense. The deck gun was cheaper. In some cases, a German boarding party could stop a small vessel, inspect its papers, order the crew into lifeboats, and sink the ship with gunfire or explosives. These methods also reflected the prize rules that had governed warfare against civilian shipping. A warship was expected to identify a merchant vessel and provide safety for its crew before destroying it, except when the target resisted or presented an immediate danger. Coastal fishing vessels occupied an even more unusual position. The Hague Convention of 1907 recognized protections for small boats used for local fishing, provided that they were not participating in military operations. On paper, a fisherman catching food for his family was not supposed to be treated like a naval combatant. But the North Sea of 1915 was not a courtroom. Britain depended on maritime trade for food, fuel, raw materials, and military supplies. German submarines were beginning to threaten that system, while the Royal Navy lacked enough purpose-built patrol vessels to guard every harbour and mile of coastline. Britain therefore turned to the ships and sailors already operating in those waters. Fishing trawlers were strong, seaworthy vessels designed to remain at sea in weather that sent smaller boats running for shelter. Their crews understood tides, shoals, currents, fog banks, and local navigation. The same equipment used to handle heavy nets could be adapted for minesweeping gear. Most importantly, thousands of trawlers already existed. The Admiralty requisitioned civilian fishing boats and converted them into naval auxiliaries. Some swept mines. Some guarded harbour approaches. Some escorted coastal shipping. Others carried depth charges or a deck gun for anti-submarine patrols. yet many retained the basic appearance of working fishing vessels. Their familiar hulls, funnels, registration markings, and cluttered decks did not immediately announce that they belonged to the Royal Navy. That resemblance created a dangerous problem for German commanders. From several miles away, an armed patrol trawler might look almost identical to a genuine fishing boat. The British quickly realized that this uncertainty could become a weapon. An ordinary warship frightened a submarine away. A disguised vessel encouraged it to approach. The British called these decoys special service ships, or mystery ships. They later became better known as Q-ships, a name associated with the Irish port of Queenstown, now Cove, where several operated. A typical Q-ship appeared to be a vulnerable merchant vessel. Naval guns were concealed behind false walls, hinged panels, cargo, or collapsible sections of the ship's structure. Its crew wore civilian clothing and practiced behaving like frightened merchant sailors. If a U-boat attacked, part of the crew might launch lifeboats and apparently abandon ship. This group became known as the Panic Party. Their performance was intended to convince the submarine commander that the vessel was helpless. The U-boat would then surface and move closer, often hoping to finish the damaged ship with its deck gun. At the right moment, the remaining crew raised the white ensign, dropped the concealment, and opened fire at close range. The entire tactic depended on one reaction. The submarine had to surface. Fishing trawlers offered another version of the same deception. Their small size gave a German captain an additional reason to conserve torpedoes and use his gun. Their daily presence in the North Sea also made them difficult to avoid completely. Some British trawlers acted as bait, while armed companions remained out of sight. If a U-boat surfaced and began firing, the other vessels rushed toward the sound of the guns. On June 5, 1915, the trawler Oceanic II appeared to be fishing alone, while 4 armed trawlers waited at a distance. A German submarine accepted the bait and engaged Oceanic II. The waiting trawlers closed in. One of them, Hawk, struck the submarine with gunfire and then rammed it. The victim was U-14. Britain had demonstrated that a group of slow fishing boats could overwhelm a submarine if they persuaded it to remain on the surface. But the Royal Navy was developing an even stranger trap. A disguised trawler would tow a British submarine beneath the water. The trawler supplied the movement and the view. The submarine supplied the torpedo. The two vessels were joined by a towing hawser and a telephone cable. The submerged submarine could not see the target clearly while being towed, so the trawler's crew became its eyes. From the surface, sailors passed the German U-boat's bearing, course, and estimated range through the telephone line. When the target entered a favorable position, the British submarine released the tow and maneuvered for an attack. The arrangement was difficult and dangerous. A submerged C-class submarine could swing behind the trawler, strain the cable, or become entangled. Mines presented another threat because the long tow could catch a mine cable and drag the explosive toward one of the vessels. Communication could also fail at the worst possible moment. But the trap possessed one extraordinary advantage. A German captain looking through binoculars saw only a fishing boat. That was the trap waiting for U-40. Taranaki had been selected to play the visible role. Beneath the surface, C-24 followed on the tow, under Lieutenant Frederick Taylor. When the German submarine appeared, information passed down the telephone cable. The British crew prepared to release the tow and attack. Then the mechanism failed. C-24 could not detach its end of the towing line. Taranaki had to release the cable from above, leaving the submerged submarine with a long hawser streaming dangerously close to its propellers. The British boat was now trying to stalk U-40 while dragging the very equipment that could disable it. On the surface, the deception continued. Taranaki behaved like a vulnerable trawler. Its crew even lowered a boat, reinforcing the appearance that they were abandoning ship. The maneuver encouraged the German submarine to remain exposed. C-24 reached a firing position and launched a torpedo. The weapon struck U-40. The German submarine sank so quickly that only 3 members of its crew survived. Among them was its commander, who had been on the bridge. Taranaki had looked helpless because helplessness was its primary weapon. The British repeated the operation less than a month later. On July 20, 1915, The trawler Princess Louise was operating near Fair Isle, between Orkney and Shetland. Beneath the water was the British submarine C-27. The trawler's commander spotted U-23 and telephoned the submerged submarine. Then the telephone connection failed. C-27's commander waited, hoping communication would return. Instead, he heard gunfire through the hull and realized that Princess Louise was under attack. The tow was released. C-27 maneuvered independently and fired a torpedo, but the first shot missed. Princess Louise then revealed its naval identity and returned fire. While the surfaced German crew dealt with the trawler, C-27 prepared a second attack. The next torpedo struck U-23 behind the conning tower. The submarine sank off Fair Isle. 10 men survived, but 24 members of its crew were killed. 2 German U-boats had been destroyed by an arrangement that looked absurd on paper. A fishing boat towing a submarine had successfully hunted another submarine. The tactic did not remain secret for long. Survivors of U-23 reportedly came into contact with civilians who were later repatriated to Germany. Information about the trap could now reach German naval authorities. British officers also recognized the practical limits of the system. The submerged submarine was difficult to control. The tow was vulnerable to mechanical failure. Operations near minefields were especially dangerous. The towing tactic was abandoned after only a few months, although the concept was briefly revived later. Its psychological effect lasted much longer. German commanders began studying fishing boats with far greater care. Was the vessel moving at the proper speed for trawling? Were its nets really in the water? Were the correct fishing signals displayed? Did it carry the expected basket or marker in its rigging? Was another vessel waiting beyond the horizon? The captain of U-40 reportedly explained after his capture that German crews often watched suspected targets before attacking. A real fishing boat behaved differently from a patrol vessel pretending to fish. That forced the British to improve the performance. A convincing decoy could not simply sail in circles and hope a submarine approached. It needed authentic fishing equipment, authentic movements, and sailors who understood how a real trawler worked. The contest became a performance conducted through binoculars. British crews tried to appear careless, routine, and harmless. German crews searched for the smallest mistake. An unusual speed might reveal a patrol vessel. Incorrectly handled nets might expose a decoy. A gun barrel could be hidden, but the behavior of the ship was harder to conceal. The uncertainty damaged the old rules of naval warfare. If a fishing vessel could tow a submarine, report a U-boat's position, sweep mines, carry a radio, or conceal a naval gun, then the shape of a trawler no longer proved civilian status. German commanders increasingly treated fishing vessels as possible military targets. Britain, in turn, armed more trawlers because German submarines were attacking them. Each response encouraged the next. Civilian and military identities became harder to separate. By the opening months of the Second World War, the problem had returned on a larger scale. Britain again requisitioned trawlers for minesweeping, escort work, harbour defence, and anti-submarine patrols. Civilian fishing vessels and naval trawlers could appear almost identical, even when viewed from the air. German U-boats reported encounters with armed fishing vessels and trawlers displaying suspicious or incorrectly positioned lights. German command concluded that some might be attempting to lure submarines into attacks. On February 17, 1940, measures were introduced against these suspicious vessels. The practical message was unmistakable. A U-boat commander could not approach a fishing trawler on the assumption that its crew was harmless. The danger was greater than it had been in 1915. A trawler no longer needed to tow a submarine to be deadly. It could carry a radio and report the contact to a shore station. It could be equipped with depth charges. It might be part of a 5-ship anti-submarine group. Its distress message could bring destroyers or patrol aircraft toward the area. Some anti-submarine trawlers later carried ASDEC, the British form of sonar. Their slow speed limited them during open ocean convoy battles, but they were valuable around harbours, coastal routes, and convoy assembly points. Their appearance still worked in their favour. A U-boat commander could not always determine whether a distant trawler carried fish, minesweeping gear, depth charges, or naval communications equipment. Surfacing also became far more dangerous because aircraft had entered the hunt. During the First World War, a submarine could often attack a small vessel on the surface without expecting an aircraft to appear within minutes. During the Second World War, coastal patrol planes could cover large areas of ocean and attack before a U-boat completed its dive. A trawler that appeared alone might therefore be only the visible part of a much larger defensive network. Its radio message could provide the U-boat's course and location. Aircraft could search ahead of it. Surface escorts could close from nearby bases. Once forced underwater, the submarine became slower and began consuming its limited battery charge. The fishing boat did not have to sink the U-boat itself. It only had to keep contact long enough for the hunters to arrive. German crews adapted by spending less time exposed near hostile coasts, attacking from greater distances and treating small vessels with suspicion. Later boats received improved anti-aircraft weapons, radar warning receivers, and snorkels that allowed diesel engines to operate while the submarine remained mostly submerged. But every solution carried a weakness. Remaining underwater reduced speed and visibility. Radar warning equipment could become obsolete when the Allies changed frequencies. Fighting aircraft on the surface exposed the pressure hull and crew. Using a torpedo against every suspicious trawler wasted weapons intended for valuable merchant ships. The British fishing fleet had created a tactical dilemma. If the submarine surfaced, the trawler might be a trap. If it remained submerged, the submarine sacrificed speed, vision, and battery power. If it attacked from a distance, it might waste a torpedo on a small boat. If it ignored the vessel, the trawler might report its position. The fishing boat did not need to win a direct battle. Its existence forced the German commander to make decisions with incomplete information. This was why the disguise mattered more than the gun. A Royal Navy destroyer was faster, more heavily armed, and far more dangerous than a trawler. But a U-boat captain knew exactly what a destroyer represented. The correct response was to dive and escape. A fishing boat created hesitation. It occupied the space between civilian and combatant, victim and hunter, bait and weapon. That hesitation could bring the submarine closer. The success of the decoy trawlers must still be kept in proportion. The submerged towing system destroyed only 2 U-boats. It did not decide either world war, and German commanders eventually learned how the trick worked. Many Q ships also failed to find a target. Others were torpedoed without ever receiving an opportunity to reveal their guns. Decoy crews sometimes accepted a direct hit because reacting too early would ruin the deception. Nor were ordinary fishermen protected from the consequences. Once fishing vessels were armed or used for naval work, German commanders had a reason to distrust every trawler they encountered. Genuine civilian crews now risked being mistaken for the decoys created to protect them. The tactic succeeded locally, but helped erase a distinction that international law had attempted to preserve. That is the darker legacy of the fishing fleet. Britain transformed familiar civilian vessels because it urgently needed patrol ships. The transformation saved merchant shipping, cleared mines, defended harbors, and destroyed submarines. But it also made innocence difficult to prove at sea. For a German lookout scanning the North Sea, every detail became a warning. A trawler hauling nets might contain a concealed gun. A harmless light could be positioned deliberately. A small boat on the horizon might be reporting the U-boat by radio. And somewhere beneath that ordinary hull, another submarine might be waiting. The men aboard U-40 discovered that possibility when C-24's torpedo struck beneath the North Sea. The men aboard U-23 learned it again 1 month later near Fair Isle. By 1940, German U-boat command no longer needed a third demonstration. Suspicious trawlers were to be treated as potential enemies, and approaching them on the surface could turn the hunter into the target. That is why the fishing fleet inspired such caution. It was never merely a collection of small boats catching fish. It was a source of crews, hulls, local knowledge, minesweepers, patrol craft, radios, depth charges, concealed guns, and carefully rehearsed deception. The Royal Navy had taken one of the most ordinary sites in British waters and made it impossible for a German commander to interpret with confidence. A warship could be identified. A fishing boat had to be guessed. For a U-boat crew on the surface, that guess could be fatal.